Today, Rob, Mark, and I break down a Vision Jet nose gear collapse incident that, in my opinion, started with one simple habit, and that's raising the flaps immediately after every landing. And I'll tell you about my involvement in the recovery of that aircraft and how I happened to be there a few minutes after it happened. And by the way, raising the flaps immediately after touchdown, it's something that professional pilots do not do, and we'll tell you why. And today, I'll be talking about the stormy weather crossing the U.S. and how it related to my analysis for an upcoming Vision Jet flight. And also I'll be reading a couple of your emails about flying into a mountain airport that we talked about on the show. Hello again and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk in general aviation. My name is Max Trescott. I've been flying for 50 years. I'm the author of several books and the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. And my mission is to help you become the safest possible pilot. Last week in episode 410, we talked with Mark Waddell of the Cirrus Owner Pilots Association about recent Cirrus landing and go-around accidents and the need for stabilized approaches. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/410. And if you're new to this show, welcome. So glad you found us. And now if you would, touch either the subscribe key or if you're using Spotify or Apple Podcasts app, the follow key so that next week's episode is downloaded for free. And my thanks to these people who've signed up in the past week to support Aviation News Talk. We have a new Patreon supporter. That's Josh Hamati. And we had 2 one-time donations via Venmo. My thanks to Monty Slatton, who says he's from Amarillo, Texas, which is one of my favorite places to stop as I'm moving airplanes across the country. And also thanks to Graham Fig. And if you're the kind of person who tips your waiter, your barista, your Uber driver, why not tip your podcast host as well? Head on out to aviationnewstalk.com/support, and I'll read your name next week. Coming up in the news for the week of January 19th, 2026, ForeFlight and Jeppesen announced layoffs. AOPA is asking pilots to contact Congress. And from our Bad Boys file, we have 3 stories of pilots in trouble. All this and more, and the news starts now. From multiple sources, ForeFlight and Jeppesen announced layoffs. Changes are afoot at ForeFlight and Jeppesen, as many of us had anticipated after they were sold from Boeing to Thoma Bravo. That deal closed on November 3rd. Thoma Bravo is a private equity firm known for software and technology-focused buyouts. In December, a month after they were purchased, ForeFlight announced that the discounts that they offer to flight instructors was being cut in half. And now, 2 months after the deal closed, there have been layoffs. I first learned of this last week from an employee who emailed me saying essentially that over 200 people were laid off. Many of them were software coders, and many of them were pilots, which is what made them both passionate and really good at their work. And it appears that some of the work is starting to be outsourced to developers in another country with lower wages. It's been reported in some places that 50% of the workforce has been cut, but apparently that's not quite accurate. I'm told that some teams have had cuts of more than 50%, including the group that develops the logbook portion of ForeFlight. So stay tuned for future news about ForeFlight and Jeppesen. From AOPA.org, AOPA asks pilots to contact Congress to support the Pilot and Aircraft Privacy Act, or PAPA. The PAPA bill would address growing concerns over the use of ADSB data, including its use by some airports to charge fees to pilots. AOPA issued a call to action asking pilots to contact their senators and representatives in Congress and urge them to co-sponsor the Pilot and Aircraft Privacy Act. AOPA President Darren Pleasant said, quote, "When the ADSB mandate went into effect in 2020, the FAA said this important technology would only be used for safety and airspace efficiency. Instead, we're now seeing it used in ways that discourage its adoption. If passed, PAPA would prohibit the use of ADSB data to assist in the collection of fees from pilots or aircraft owners, clarify that ADSB data may only be used for its intended purpose of air safety, traffic, and efficiency, expand a provision in the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 that would effectively ban any government official from initiating a non-criminal investigation based solely on ADSB data, ensure airports are transparent about proposed fees and their intended purpose, and give the Secretary of Transportation the discretion to authorize other uses of ADSB data." AOPA also said, quote, "To be clear, the bill would not prevent airports from imposing fees on pilots, nor would it impede the use of FlightAware, Flight Radar 24, and other popular flight tracking apps. When this bill becomes law, Airports will be able to impose fees as long as they are fair and reasonable. Airports could also continue to use ADSB to monitor traffic counts, understand traffic patterns and flows to help them manage and create operational efficiencies. From FAA.gov, FAA makes permanent restrictions for helicopters and powered lift aircraft in certain areas near Reagan National Airport. According to Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, these restrictions apply unless those aircraft are conducting essential operations. The restrictions were put in place immediately following the DCA mid-air collision and are supported by NTSB's preliminary recommendations. The rule will prohibit certain helicopter operations when runways 15 and 33 are in use at DCA. In addition, helicopter Route 4 between Haynes Point and the Wilson Bridge is closed. There is a revised agreement with the military to require ADSB out broadcasting, and they've eliminated the use of visual separation by air traffic controllers within 5 nautical miles of DCA. And separately but somewhat related, in December 2025, the U.S. Senate passed by unanimous consent the ROTOR Act, which stands for Rotorcraft Operation Transparency and Oversight Reform. That bill will eliminate a loophole that allows military aircraft to operate without ADSB out. From AOPA.org, House passes bill that would block ATC privatization. House and Senate appropriators reached an agreement on a package of 4 spending bills that include DOT and the FAA. The Senate is expected to pass the bill before government funding runs out on January 30th. A report from the Senate Appropriations Committee in July stated, quote, "The committee does not support any efforts to transfer the FAA's ATC functions to a not-for-profit independent private corporation. The committee is aware that if the nation's air traffic control system had been privatized during the COVID-19 pandemic, similar to other navigation service providers in Canada and the European Union, the U.S. would have faced severe funding shortfalls. Those shortfalls would have likely led to controller layoffs and greater risk to flight safety and a slower recovery after the end of the pandemic, thus leading to more flight delays and price increases for consumers." AOPA Vice President Jim Kuhn said, quote, "Other countries that have gone down the privatization path continue to face delays, funding shortfalls, and staffing shortages." In addition to blocking ATC privatization, the House bill would provide funding to hire 2,500 new air traffic controllers and 54 additional aviation safety inspectors. From avweb.com, report shows rise in DPE supply. The Flight School Association of North America, or FASANA, released new figures last month related to the U.S. supply of designated pilot examiners, or DPEs. According to the report, in the fiscal year 2024-25, there were increases in both practical tests conducted for applicants and the total number of examiners. FASANA reported DPEs conducted nearly 154,000 practical test events last year, up from 129,000 the year before and 140,000 the year before that. The organization further reported that the total examiner pool reached 1,122 active DPEs. The data show a broad range of activity levels among examiners. FASANA reported that 536 DPEs completed between 100 and 400 tests, while 319 DPEs conducted fewer than 50 tests during the fiscal year. A smaller group of 48 examiners performed more than 400 tests, including 22 who recorded more than 500 evaluations during the year. The association noted that 264 DPEs accounted for 52.9% of all tests by completing 200 or more evaluations. From FAA.gov, Super Bowl 60, what GA pilots need to know. GA pilots flying in the San Francisco Bay Area from February 4th to 10th, 2026, must be aware of TFRs following special flight procedures and comply with additional operational requirements that will be in effect for Super Bowl 60. The FAA will issue a NOTAM later in January about the procedures for the games and specific arrival and departure route requirements. Information about the San Francisco area airports and airspace is available on the FAA's Super Bowl webpage. Special air traffic procedures are in effect for the following airports. They list every airport from Monterey north to Napa and Concord and east to Stockton. They say a reservation program to facilitate aircraft parking will be in effect from February 4th through February 9th, and that pilots should contact FBOs at their airport to obtain reservations and additional information. The FAA will publish a TFR for the Super Bowl centered on Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, California. They expect the TFR will be active from 2:30 to 8:30 p.m. local time on Sunday, February the 8th. The TFR will have a 30 nautical mile outer ring and a more restrictive 10 nautical mile inner core. And that, by the way, will almost certainly close the Reed-Hillview Airport and likely the Palo Alto Airport as well. And from Facebook.com, a new glider distance record. Gary Osoba posted on his page that on December 19th, 2 glider pilots set a new U.S. distance record flying from the California-Nevada border to Dodge City, Kansas. Using lift from periodic and high-altitude mountain waves, they covered 1,112 miles in about half a day without an engine. There's a link to an Instagram video that shows their best climb of the day with ascent rates of more than 2,000 feet per minute over Colorado's Sangre de Cristo mountain range. And it notes be sure to turn on the sound. And I'll include a link to that in the show notes. Gary continues, it was a spectacular flight requiring a lot of preparation, stamina, and skill as they flew an altitude band of about 20,000 to 28,000 feet. Life support systems and backups are essential for oxygen and heat, as the temperatures at that altitude were minus 20 to minus 40 Fahrenheit. Their final glide from about 28,000 feet with good tailwinds covered 240 miles. So congratulations to Gordon Bettiger and Bruce Campbell. And now here are 3 stories from our Bad Boys files. What are you going to do when they come for you? First, we have 3 stolen planes, which is highly unusual. We just don't seem to have as many planes stolen in recent years as we've had in the past. From avweb.com, stolen plane crashes into hangar. A Cessna 172 that's believed to have been stolen from an LA area flight school crashed into a hangar at Van Nuys early one morning in late December, prompting an investigation. Officials said the allegedly stolen plane was taken before dawn from a flight training facility at the airport. The FBI confirmed it's assisting the LA airport police in response to the incident. The stolen plane impacted the exterior of a hangar at about 5 a.m. shortly after it was taken. Authorities told NBC4 that the aircraft never left the ground. Law enforcement said 1 person was taken into custody on suspicion of burglary and aircraft theft. And from KIRO7.com, which is a Seattle-based TV station, FBI investigates stolen planes, 1 found at Auburn Airport. Federal investigators are trying to solve the mystery of who stole 2 planes. The first one was taken from California and later recovered at Auburn Municipal Airport in Washington state. The second one, taken from the same airport, Auburn Airport, and later found in California. According to King County Sheriff's Office, a Cessna TR-182 was stolen from Chino, California on December 12th. It later landed at Crest Air Park in Covington, Washington. Then it was stolen again on Christmas Eve, taken from Covington to Auburn. 2 days later, the plane was taken once again, flown from Auburn to Cougar Mountain Airport in Yelm. That same day, it was flown back to Auburn, where authorities recovered the plane. Now, picking up on that story from avbrief.com, there was later another theft that may be related. Authorities in Washington are looking for a younger couple with a couple of fuzzy white dogs in connection with a string of airplane thefts in Auburn near Seattle that involved an RV-12IS built by local high school students. According to King 5 News, the first incident involved an aircraft that was stolen in California, recovered at a private field, and then stolen again. Then on January 3rd, Teen Flight Puyallup's newly built RV-12IS, which now belongs to an Auburn couple, was flown away at 4:27 a.m. After the transponder was turned off 2 minutes later, it wasn't seen for 3 days. The 2-place experimental was found at Corona Municipal Airport in California, almost 900 miles away. It's not clear if the plane was damaged at all, although authorities have not yet linked the thefts. The new owner says it seems likely the incidents are related. The couple is now trying to figure out how to get the plane back from California. Meanwhile, gate codes have been changed at the Auburn airport. And finally, from idahopress.com, pilot in crash near Boise charged with operating aircraft under the influence. The pilot who struck a light pole and crashed near the Boise airport in November 2025 has been arrested on a warrant alleging he was operating an airplane under the influence. The male pilot, age 61 of Twin Falls, was arrested on a misdemeanor charge of aircraft operating under the influence. Police said he was flying a small aircraft with a passenger on November 8th. Traveling from Twin Falls, he was scheduled to arrive in Boise around 6:40 p.m. An eyewitness with the Idaho National Guard said that he saw the airplane hit the light pole and crash land on the right side of the street. Police said that the responding officers believed the pilot was showing signs of being under the influence. He and his passengers were taken to a nearby hospital for their injuries. After further investigation, it was determined that the pilot was under the influence while operating the aircraft, and last week, more than 2 months after the accident, he was taken into custody and booked. Well, that's the news for this week. Coming up next, a few of your emails, and then our conversation with Rob Mark about how professional pilots fly. But first... And now here's a Headset Minute by Lightspeed with Derek Schmidt. Derek, I'm always connecting my Lightspeed to my phone, either to make phone calls or to provide sound from the headset for the videos I shoot. Talk about the other different ways pilots can use Bluetooth with their headsets.
Yeah, aviation headsets certainly have come a long way. While headsets used to consist of simple speakers on a headband, most premium aviation headsets now come standard with Bluetooth modules that allow them to pair with a pilot's phone and tablet. The Bluetooth pairing can seamlessly integrate the use of those personal electronic devices through the headset, making available exciting applications designed to keep pilots safe and improve cell phone communications on the ground. At many airports around the United States, pilots must make a cell phone call to a tower or operator to get clearance before takeoff. Having the cell phone go through your headset can save pilots time repeating what they or the operator has said, because the sound goes through their headset and isn't muffled or distorted by the background sound of the engines. Many pilots also are using applications like ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot to get audible alerts in their headset of real-time weather, traffic, and GPS data during flights. These real-time alerts are being sent directly to the pilot's headset, giving them up-to-date safety information throughout their flight, allowing them optimal time to react to any unforeseen weather or traffic events. Some aviation headsets, like the Lightspeed Zulu 4 headset, can even pair over Bluetooth to 2 devices at the same time. For pilots who use both a cell phone and a tablet at the same time, they can make a phone call to get clearance and can automatically switch to their tablet without having to unpair and repair their headset between the devices. This really simplifies the use of multiple Bluetooth devices in their aircraft.
Derek, thanks so much for sharing with us how we can stay connected with Bluetooth.
You're welcome, Max.
And now let's get to the good news. First, congratulations to Sam Dawson. He's a longtime patron supporter. He writes, Max, I just earned my commercial multi-engine seaplane rating at Sebring Aviation in Florida with a check ride at the world-renowned Jack Brown Seaplane Base. The instructors at Sebring were great. This is the same place where AirCam kits are built. Well, congratulations to you, Sam. Sounds like you did that flying in an AirCam. I've got some time in an AirCam on floats, and it is so much fun. And if you have good news to share or anything else you'd like to tell me, do what Sam did to contact me and go to aviationnewstalk.com and click on Contact at the top of the page. That is so much better than trying to reach me through the various social media and emails and whatever. I have so much trouble going back and finding stuff. But if you go there, click on Contact, I always will have access to that information. And now let's talk about our video of the week. We have a new one. It's a follow-up to our discussion in episode 409, in which we talked about the crash of November 257 Bravo Whiskey, a Citation 550 that killed retired NASCAR driver Greg Biffle and 6 others. And as I said in that episode, the NTSB altitude data appeared to briefly freeze for 34 seconds, and then it jumped back up 1,300 feet in under 2 seconds, which of course would be physically impossible for the plane to have done. And I'd mentioned there that I think that's the reason the aircraft turned back to the runway, though I don't think it's ultimately why the aircraft crashed. Now, NTSB out has 2 different outputs, and I just looked at one of them, which was the barometric altitude. But it also has a GPS-derived geometric altitude. So I went back and I looked at that altitude data, and then I plotted the 2 sets of data against each other. And that provides proof positive of what I said in 409, which was that I thought that the aircraft was climbing normally during the time when the altitude data appeared to freeze. So I created a video that compares the 2 sets of data, and you can see how the GPS-derived data shows a normal climb while the barometric data freezes and then quickly jumps back in place to closely mirror the GPS data once again. Now, Patreon supporters have already received an email with a link to that video, so if you're not already a supporter, please sign up now to support the show and get early access to information like that. And the links for this video and all of our videos of the week is on the same page with the links where you can become a supporter. So when you go out to view the videos, look down at the bottom of the page for the video links, and at the top of the page, you'll see 4 options for supporting the show. So to see all of these videos of the week, go online to aviationnewstalk.com/video. And just a quick note that next week, the NTSB will hold a public board meeting on Tuesday, January 27th, to determine the probable cause of the midair collision between a PSA Airlines CRJ-700 jetliner and the U.S. Army Sikorsky UH-60L Black Hawk helicopter over the Potomac River near the Reagan National Airport last year. During the meeting, the NTSB board members will discuss safety issues related to the crash and vote on the probable cause. And I'll be watching the webcast of that meeting, taking notes and recording audio clips from it, and then I'll bring that to you in a future episode, either on this show or possibly on NTSB News Talk. If you listen to NTSB News Talk, then you know that back in episodes 7, 8, and 9, I did summaries of 3 days of hearings that were held last summer about this crash. So if you're not already following that show in whatever podcast app you use, search for NTSB News Talk and touch either the follow or the subscribe key. And I'll include a link in today's show notes with the website that you can go to view Tuesday's public board meeting if you have time to do that. Now let's talk about the weather across the U.S. and a Vision Jet trip of mine that just got canceled. Lately, I've been doing a lot of Vision Jet flying, which I really enjoy. Speaking of which, if you were buying a new or used Vision Jet this year and you'd like to do the 25 hours of SOE or supervised operating experience that you'll need to do in the jet after you finish your type rating, please contact me. We have lots of fun doing these. I've now got about 1,000 hours of experience in the airplane, and I'm happy to share that with you. Now, I was supposed to leave on this Sunday for a 4-day trip to Chicago. It was to be just the 2 of us, so we would have needed just a single fuel stop. In the past, I've used the web-based ForeFlight Trip Assistant tool to plan fuel stops, but my client told me that it's being discontinued in February. So if you know of any similar tools, please let me know. We were planning to refuel in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and then land at Chicago Executive, previously known as Pewaukee, sometime after dark on Sunday. And originally it looked like the big storm hitting the country was going to be passing just south of Chicago. But as I looked at the weather on Thursday, I could see the forecast was showing a couple of inches of snow for Sunday in Chicago. So in the worst case, we would have been landing with ice-contaminated wings on a wet runway. So that's 2 factors that increase the landing distance. In the Vision Jet, and actually this is also true in the SR-20 and SR-22, when you have ice-contaminated wings, you cannot land with full flaps, and landing with 50% flaps requires a higher landing speed and hence takes more runway. So when I calculated both factors for our landing weight, I found that the total landing distance was very close to the 5,000-foot runway length at Chicago Executive. So as I started to think about other options, the first one that came to mind was to land further north out of the storm path. So I was going to recommend to my client that we consider landing at Milwaukee and drive to Chicago. Now, my wife, who's heard me talk a lot about risk management, suggested a perhaps better solution, which was that we leave a day earlier and arrive before the storm. So I was about to contact the client and offer these 2 alternatives when I got a message from him saying that he was canceling the trip. Apparently he was planning to have company team members fly into Chicago for a meeting, but some of them were having difficulty getting there as the airlines started canceling flights ahead of the storm. And on Friday, Pete Muntean posted on X that, quote, U.S. airlines have already canceled 2,500 plus flights for Saturday, making it the worst day for air travel in the past year. Nearly 4,500 cancellations are now posted from Friday through Sunday. So sounds like the airlines are getting smarter about dealing with weather and canceling flights before the weather hits. So if you're in the storm path, which we'll be tracking from Texas through the South and the Midwest up to New England, please be careful when you drive and please reevaluate any GA flying plans that you may have. Consider all of the options available to you, including canceling your planned flight. Because as we say, it's always better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground. So, hey, let's be careful out there. And I want to share a couple of listener emails. These came in response to my discussion in episode 401 about the crash of an SR-22 that killed a country singer when he was attempting to land at Macon County Airport in Franklin, North Carolina in September. You may recall that I talked about how the airport is in a valley surrounded by 5,000-foot mountains in nearly all directions, and that the pilot did a 360-degree turn to final to get down, was still too high, and did a go-around. He then flew the traffic pattern high, which led to an unstable approach to the runway. And I mentioned that by looking at a sectional chart, it was apparent that by altering his course slightly, he could have descended along a river valley that would have let him join the 45 leg to the traffic pattern at the traffic pattern altitude. I also mentioned that when flying into unfamiliar airports, especially those in mountains or in metropolitan areas, that it's helpful to contact a local pilot for information about that airport before you fly there. Now, a couple of you wrote to me about your experiences flying into Macon County Airport, which is 1 Alpha 5. Laura Simmons sent me a photo, and she labeled it about to enter left downwind for runway 7 at 1A5 in August 2025. And she wrote, and by the way, in that photo you can see lots of mountains. She wrote, I called and spoke with a worker at the airport before going. He is a GA pilot and has years of experience flying here. He talked me through approaching the airport by following the river, starting at a VFR reporting point southeast of the Tyson Airport in Knoxville. It was a beautiful flight. I went with another pilot who had flown to the airport once before. The mountains in the distance are what the Cirrus pilot would have dropped in over. Looking at those hills near the approach to runway 7 sort of explains why one might creep toward the runway and stay close on base. If you ever have a chance to fly to 1A5 following the river, I recommend it. It is beautiful. Other than my one-time landing in Harlan, Kentucky, this was my only experience at any type of mountain flying. I just finished listening to your most recent podcast and thought you might want to see 1A5. Wishing you all the best, Laura Simmons. Well, Laura, thanks so much for your email. And listener Drew Stoken wrote, he said, Max, I'm a big fan of your show and I've learned a lot from it. Let me tell you about my recent experiences while landing at 1A5 and how listening to this show may have saved my life. A little background on me, he writes, I'm a 68-year-old pilot that's been flying for 3 years, and I've had an instrument rating for a year before this flight. I bought, as my first plane, a new SR-22 G7 in September of 2024. I had 500 hours total and 300 hours in my G7 at the time of this flight. As you can see, I've been flying a lot since I had delivery of this airplane. In spite of this, I consider myself a low-time pilot with much to learn. On July 30th, just 6 weeks before the fatal crash you discussed, I flew from York, PA on an instrument flight to 1A5. It was a marginal VFR day, and I was in and out of IMC on the 3-hour flight. Descending into 1A5 on the RNAV GPS Alpha, the only approach, and it's steep. The circling approach has you crossing the runway on a perpendicular, then requiring you to choose either left traffic to runway 7 or right traffic to 25. And he says, note that it's right traffic on 25 due to terrain. I chose left traffic to runway 7 as the winds favored that runway at the time. As I was on the downwind, eyeing up my base turn, I noticed a very intimidating ridge crossing up to meet my base leg. I still needed to lose altitude and turn onto base and cross the ridge, seemingly very close to the trees. And this is where the magic happened. I knew that I wouldn't have a glide slope since it was a circling approach, so I entered, this would be into the avionics, the visual approach to runway 7 just after seeing the airport. As I approached my turn to final, a magenta diamond appeared on the altitude tape showing I was still high. Then the highway in the sky box from the side appeared, giving me a target to point my green pumpkin, which would be the flight path marker. It's kind of a gun sight looking device. Point that on to intercept the glide slope. In spite of my efforts at losing altitude, I was still above the 3-degree glide slope when I turned onto final, but I had enough time to slip the plane to lose some altitude before finally intercepting the glide slope and landing nicely. Had I not had those few more seconds on base to see how high I was and correct, I would have been even higher as I turned onto final. Oh, did you notice the Pappy is out of service indefinitely and has been for 2 years? Certainly the approach to this runway is a setup for disaster. Without this trick of landing in the visual approach, and this trick I picked up right here on Aviation News Talk. During my transition training, when I picked up my SR-22 10 months prior, there was a damaged and sad-looking Cirrus SF50 Vision Jet sitting on the ramp in front of the FBO, the victim of a hard landing. And as I was being fueled up for my return flight on this recent flight, I mentioned that to the lineman, and he informed me that they now had a bent-up King Air that was sitting in a hangar, another victim of a rough landing. At the time, I felt pretty proud of myself for being able to land there without much undue effort or incident. But after hearing the news of the fatal crash and lining up their NTSB data with my FlyStow data, I felt an absolute chill go up my spine, knowing exactly what happened to him and what might have saved him and his family. Max, thanks so much for everything you do for us. Laura and Drew, thank you so much for sharing your stories, and I'll be writing more about this accident and share Laura's and Drew's stories in an upcoming issue of Flying Magazine. So if you don't already subscribe to that magazine, you might want to do that. And I just want to mention that mountain airports in general have much higher accident rates than airports in the flatlands. We talked about that in relation to the Truckee Tahoe Airport, in which they said that they compare themselves with other mountain airports, and they compare favorably with those, but it's just natural that when you've got lots of terrain, accident rates are going to be higher. So do all the work you can in advance to prepare and get additional training before you fly into mountain airports. Coming up next, our conversation with Rob Mark about a Vision Jet landing gear collapse and my involvement with the recovery of that aircraft. All right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let me tell you a little about Rob Mark. He's worked as an air traffic controller and as an airline pilot, corporate pilot, and CFI. He publishes the Jetwine blog at jetwine.com, and he's an award-winning journalist. He's also my co-host on NTSB News Talk podcast. And now here's our conversation with Rob Mark. Rob, welcome to the show. Great to have you back.
Hey, it's nice to be here, Max.
Well, the funny thing is we have not had you on Aviation News Talk for a number of months, but you and I get to talk all the time on the NTSB News Talk show, where I'm having a great time. We're, I think, sharing a lot of good information. And this particular story we're going to talk about today is the kind of thing we would do on that show. So I think this gives our audience here an idea of just what it is you and I have been up to for the last 19 episodes on that other show.
That's true, and I'm glad they're here.
Well, in some ways, this is exactly what we do on that particular show. But we're looking for a larger audience because some of the lessons from this are broadly applicable, so that's why we wanted to share it today. This involves November 727 Victor Bravo as Vision Jet SF50, an accident that occurred in Watsonville, California on August the 9th, 2024. There were 2 people on board. Fortunately, there were no injuries, and the final NTSB report is out. And so much of what we're going to talk about comes directly from that report. Now, interestingly, I have a connection with this accident or incident, whichever you want to call it, because moments after it occurred, a friend of mine who works for the FAA and knows that I do a lot of work with Vision Jets phoned me to say, hey, Max, there's a Vision Jet that's stuck on the runway at Watsonville and the airport is now closed. Now, Watsonville is about an hour from my home, but totally coincidentally, I was about 10 minutes away. So my wife and I jumped in the car to drive over to Watsonville to see how we could assist. And I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. But here's what the final NTSB report says. It says the pilot reported that during the landing roll, because they were just landing, about the time that he was applying the brakes, the nose landing gear collapsed. Having no training on what to do in this scenario, he said that he cycled the landing gear by raising, then lowering the landing gear control handle. Post-flight inspection revealed substantial damage to the undercarriage near the nose landing gear bay. Stored onboard central maintenance computer, or CMC data, showed that before touchdown, the airplane was properly configured for landing with the flaps at 100%. The nose and both main landing gear were down and locked. After touchdown and during the landing roll, while both weight on wheels switches, also known as WOW, W-O-W switches, were temporarily unloaded, the landing gear handle was raised and then lowered, which unlocked the nose gear and allowed it to collapse. Additionally, both main landing gear became unlocked, but relocked before they could collapse. After the nose gear collapse, the gear handle indicated an unexplained 4-second anomaly by indicating neither up nor down, then indicating down. Post-accident examination and a landing gear swing test revealed no pre-accident mechanical malfunctions or failures with the airplane that would have precluded normal operation. A missing nose landing gear locking spring from the nose gear assembly was not causal to the accident. The flap selector switch was located below the landing gear control handle. Further review of CMC data showed that the operators of the airplane often raised the flaps within seconds after touchdown, which was about the time that the nose landing gear collapsed. Although the pilot was familiar with the airplane and had accrued about 102 flight hours within the past 90 days, it is likely that the pilot inadvertently raised the landing gear control handle during the landing roll instead of selecting the flap selector switch to 0%. Probable cause: the pilot's inadvertent use of the landing gear control handle instead of the flap selector switch during the landing rollout, which resulted in the collapse of the nose landing gear. And then further down in the report, it says a review of ADSB and downloaded CMC data from the airplane revealed that at 12:50, while the airplane was about 1,250 feet from the approach threshold of the runway, the flaps were at 100%, the landing gear handle indicated down, and the nose gear and left and right main landing gear were down and locked. 14 seconds later, the airplane touched down as indicated by the left and right wheel speed increasing from 0 to about 1,501 RPM and 1,488 RPM respectively. 1 second later, the WOW data indicated a load on the left and right main landing gear. 2 seconds later, the WOW data indicated no load on either landing gear. The gear handle indicated in the down position, and the landing gear indicated down and locked. A few seconds later, the gear handle indicated in the up position, and the WOW switches indicated no load. By the way, people might wonder why would there be no load, and I think everybody's had the experience that when you touch down, sometimes the airplane floats up just a little bit. Not a whole lot, but that would be just enough to unload those particular switches. So I think this is something that could happen in any landing. Continuing on, it says the left and right main landing gear indicated down but not locked, and the nose gear indicated down and locked. At the same time, the hydraulic pack was enabled, and the landing gear was directed up. 1 second later, the nose gear also indicated down but not locked. At the same time, the left WOW switch indicated no load, and the right WOW switch indicated a load. So it was a little heavier on the right wheel. It was still light on the left wheel. The hydraulic pack remained enabled, and the landing gear continued to be directed up. A few seconds later, the gear handle indicated down, the nose gear indicated not down and not locked. The left and right main landing gear indicated down but not locked. Hydraulic pump was enabled, and the gear was not directed up. The airplane indicated a 12.5 degree nose down attitude. So obviously the nose dropped down at that particular point. And then it indicates for a 4-second period, the gear handle indicated neither up nor down. 1 second later, the gear handle indicated down. And this, by the way, to me is very interesting. It says, a review of the CMC data for the prior 12 flights revealed that flap retraction from 100% to 0% occurred anytime from 2 seconds after touchdown to 70 seconds after touchdown, with 8 out of 10 times being within 2 to 5 seconds after touchdown. The accident flight recorded no flap retraction. So here's what I remember from that day last summer. When we arrived, I drove over to Specialized Aviation, which I knew that there was a place there to park, and there was a gate close to the airport. And from there, I could actually see the airplane straight out across from their facility. And I walked out to the field, and that's where I found the head of Specialized Aviation, who I've known for a number of years. And I just want to mention they're the helicopter school where I got my certificate 2 years ago. So I was quite familiar with him and their operation. He had a forklift, and they were trying to figure out how to raise the nose of the aircraft. It was just off the left edge of the runway, probably, I would say halfway down the runway. So maybe 2,500 to maybe 3,000 feet from the far end of the runway where it would have touched down. And I was the one who said, hey, let's call Cirrus support. I've got them in my contacts. So I called the SF50 support number to get some advice from them. And I actually handed the phone over to Chris, the head of Specialized, and he talked with them. And ultimately, they figured out how to go about securing the aircraft, raising it, and then being able to pull the nose gear out so that they could then tow it off the runway. So interestingly, I was at a meeting last year with a lot of SF50 pilots, and Cirrus presented data at that time that there had been, prior to this, 5 different incidents where Vision Jets had the nose gear collapse because a pilot raised the landing gear during the rollout. So this then would be the 6th one of those. They have about 600 aircraft that have been delivered. So amazingly, that tells you that this problem has occurred to 1% of the fleet. So let's talk about this, Rob. I mean, you've worked as a professional pilot. What do professional pilots know and do when they're landing?
What we know is that there are checklists for everything. And as having flown in the left and the right seat on a number of turbine airplanes, once we touch down, we slow the airplane, turn off, and we may stop or we may continue taxiing, but then the PIC says after landing checklist. And that is the point at which the person in the other seat runs through the items, and one of them is usually raise the flaps. And of course, even in my experience in turbines, someone will do the afters and I'll watch them. It's not meant as to be disrespectful or that I don't trust them or whatever. I just, I'm in charge of the airplane. I just want to make sure that as they grab for things, and some people run through the afters pretty quick. And that is a time when people can make mistakes. I just like to watch that. But anyway, when you're single pilot, you have nobody to back you up. And again, the reason that people did like to pull the flaps up after touchdown was because they were taught at some point in their training that it puts more weight on the wheels and contributes to better braking and shortening the landing roll. However, you pull the gear up by mistake, if that's indeed what happened, that certainly shortens your landing roll. But it also adds a huge bill for things to be fixed. So again, there's a reason that we have a checklist in a professionally flown airplane. And there are reasons that we don't do anything quickly. And I can't remember a time in a jet, any of the Citations, the Hawkers, the Falcons, that we said, as soon as we touch down, we have got to get all the weight on the wheels so the airplane can be stopped. We just don't do that, because if you're cutting it that close, you probably shouldn't be landing there in those conditions. So mistakes happen, and they usually happen when people try to rush. Now, I don't know that's what happened here, but I'm just saying that is why we pull the flaps up after we have turned off the runway, when there's nothing really to distract us, and everybody can make sure that we're doing what we should be doing.
I talked about this concept once before on the show, and the concept being that after you touch down, professional pilots don't touch anything until after they've slowed, they've gotten off the runway, and then they run the checklist as you just described. And I actually, after that episode, had an airline captain contact me, and he said, Max, that's absolutely true. We are taught the only two things we are allowed to touch after touchdown is going to be the thrust reversers and the tiller, which, of course, would be for steering the aircraft. So as pilots in smaller aircraft, we're using our feet to steer after we've touched down. But since we don't have thrust reversers in most GA aircraft, we should not be touching anything while we are on the runway. The problem, I think, as you allude to, is that there is a lot of primary training that is done for short-field landings where pilots are taught, hey, after you touch down, raise those flaps because that's going to shorten your ground roll distance. I did some research on this, and I could not find any hard data on what percentage of ground roll you're going to save by doing that. The best estimates I could come up with were that perhaps it would reduce the ground roll by maybe 5%, which for most GA aircraft is going to be on the order of maybe 100 feet. As you said, if you've got so little runway that it's important that you raise the flaps to shorten your ground roll, you have no business landing on that particular runway, which is to say there is no good reason to raise the flaps after you touch down, unless you find yourself in the unusual situation of landing on the wrong runway and it was shorter than you expected it to be. And the other thing you mentioned is when running these checklists is raising the flaps. One thing I like to encourage people to do is when they reach down for that flap lever after they've gotten off the runway, they've come to a full stop, that they should look at the label next to the handle and say the words flaps identified. Because just because you've come to a stop, if you're rushing at all, you could grab the wrong handle. So I think the habit of, saying flaps identified because you've looked at the word flaps, that I think also reduces the odds of grabbing the wrong handle.
And I think, too, that sometimes when you have more than one pilot in the aircraft, it can lead to issues. I remember years ago, I was flying a I call it a mix master, but it was a Skymaster, which was one of Cessna's earlier twins. It had one engine in the front, one in the back between two tail booms, two vertical stabilizers. But anyway, I was in the left seat flying the airplane. I had the owner in the right seat, and we landed someplace at night. I can't remember where, but I do dearly recall that I barely had the nose gear down, and I saw his hand going for something at the bottom of the instrument panel. And I said, no, and he raised the flaps on me. And so I was so angry. I said, no, this is not the time. Get the airplane stopped, get it off the runway, get to where you're going to park, get it all shut down, and then have a conversation with this person. And I actually worked for this person, and I said in a nice way, please don't ever do that again. He said, but I'm trying to help. I said, you're not helping. I explained to him what he could have caused. And he said, I don't know. He said, you're just making such a big deal out of it. And I said, well, I'm sorry that you see it that way, but please, I'm asking you nicely, don't ever do that again, because if you do it to me, you're going to be looking for another pilot. Because I have a pretty good record of not breaking any airplanes over the years of flying, and I don't want an accident on my record, but I sure as heck don't want an accident that wasn't even at my instigation, and that would be the worst kind.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, it's interesting that people think that, oh, I'll never make that particular mistake. And I bet there are people listening right now who are thinking, no big deal. I would never make that mistake. I would never grab the landing gear by accident. If I grab the flaps, I know it's going to be the flaps handle. I was talking with John Fiskus, who we just had on the show here a couple of episodes ago. He is the co-founder of the Flight Academy, which is a Cirrus flight school up in Washington State. He does a lot of simulator training for Cirrus back in Knoxville in the Vision Jet simulator. We were talking about this problem of people raising the nose gear instead of the flaps. And he said that there was a time that he had a gentleman in the simulator, and after he did his first landing, he raised the flaps. And John said, do not do that. That's an incredibly bad habit. It could lead to accidentally raising the landing gear. The guy turned to him and said, that's ridiculous. I will never make that particular mistake. John kind of, didn't say anything. They continued on. Wouldn't you know, the very next landing, this guy lands, he raises the landing gear, even after he had just insisted he would never make that particular mistake. And he just turned and looked at John, with his face kind of in horror and disbelief. And I think that lesson landed really strongly and hard with him, that just because you think you will never make that mistake, even if you insist to your instructor that you will never make that mistake, people make mistakes all the time. And so to prevent that mistake, just don't touch the flaps. Wait till you're off to the runway and then run through your checklist.
A wise instructor years ago, a former World War II guy that I flew with that had flown P-51s in the war, said, Rob, one piece of advice I'll give you, be very careful when you use the word never or always. It'll get you in trouble.
Yeah, indeed. So I actually had a conversation with one of the training managers at Cirrus about a year ago about this particular issue. And I said, there is a real problem. In some of the Cirrus checklists for the SR-20, the SR-22, as part of the landing checklist, it actually said after touchdown, raise the flaps. And so we have a whole generation of people who have been trained in piston airplanes that is the correct, proper thing to do because that's what the checklist said to do. He told me, Max, we know this is a problem. We have been in the process of trying to change all of those checklists, trying to remove that from those checklists, that it's been about a 3-year process to make that occur. Doesn't surprise me because it probably requires some kind of FAA approval. So I think what people don't realize is primacy is incredibly powerful. And primacy is what you learn first, is what you remember best. A lot of people have been trained in these airplanes. Oh, after touchdown, raise the flaps. We have a whole generation of instructors, sadly, who are still telling people after you touch down, raise the flaps. Now, if you only fly a fixed gear airplane forever, this is not going to be a problem. And yet, we don't want to train people for the airplane they're flying today. We want to train people for the airplane they may be flying tomorrow. And this is a huge problem once you move up into retractable gear aircraft.
And then there are those people who say, I'm never going to own or fly a retractable gear airplane, so it doesn't matter until they do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of people don't realize that there may come a time where they step up to an aircraft where that bad habit that they developed in fixed gear aircraft that they thought would never bother them because they would never be in any other kind of aircraft turns around to bite them. So anyway, I guess the moral of the story is pilots make mistakes. You got to train to fly like a professional pilot, even if you're not going to be hired as a professional pilot. Professional pilots don't touch anything after they land until after they're off the runway on the taxiway.
Train as you will fly and fly as you were trained. That's what we like to say.
Yep. So this is a huge problem. I sure hope that we've helped save somebody from the expense and the embarrassment of raising the landing gear at some point in the future. Rob, thanks so much for joining us here today to talk about this problem.
Hey, you betcha. We'll see you next time, Max. Thanks for inviting me.
And my thanks to Rob Mark for joining us here today. You can see more of his work at jetwine.com. And of course, you can hear him on the NTSB News Talk podcast. And just a reminder that I love hearing from you, and I read many of your emails on the show. If you'd like to send me a message, just go out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Contact at the top of the page. That's absolutely the best way to send me a message. And of course, I also want to thank everyone who supports the show in one of the following ways. We love it when you join the club and sign up at aviationnewstalk.com/support to support the show financially. You can also do that at aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. We also love it when you leave a 5-star review on whatever app that you're listening to us on now. And of course, if you're in the market for a headset, please consider buying a Lightspeed headset and using one of the links in our show notes, because if you use those links, they will donate to help support the show. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up. And remember that you can always go around.
You can always go around. If it don't look right coming down, don't wait until your silence, baby, sliding upside down.